Before we get started, I'd like to mention that this is a spoiler-filled review. If you haven't played the first or the second game, I will be spoiling aspects of them in this review. I won't be spoiling everything, but I will be going over major plot points in the first game and in this one as well. So if you don't want any spoilers, I would suggest going back and playing the first one and this one. They're very good. And although I do have a couple of issues that I'll get into, but if you haven't done so, do so. And if you don't want to do so because you don't care about spoilers, then I am more than happy that you're here with me. So let's get into it, shall we? Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon. This is Timothy Belfry here, and today I'd like to talk about AI, the Somnium Files Nirvana Initiative. I have mixed feelings about this game. On one hand, I really like most of the characters, but on the other hand, there are some very annoying things that they did in this game that I just can't quite get over. So I'll get into it. Okay, so to not start this video on a negative, I'd instead like to go on what I like about the game. The first is that a lot of the new characters are really likable, and the ones who aren't are obviously written to be so. And what I mean by likable is that they go into a lot of detail about these characters, and you get to interact with all of them quite a few times, because the cast in this game is rather small despite being a well, I guess in murder mysteries most of the cast tends to be kind of small, but that's relatively unusual for video games to keep the cast so few. And so you really get to get into the head of these characters, and I mean literally you do. So you get a excellent grasp on who these characters are, and it ends up really endearing or making you hate these characters more. And honestly, it's brilliant. I love the character writing in this game, besides one character that is done particularly poorly in my opinion, but otherwise I love it. It's great. My favorite character in this game is definitely Andy's Komeiji, who's voiced by Brent Mukai in the English dub, and Brent does a fantastic job. He sells this character so well. He's kind of pathetic and is constantly screwing things up, but he does what he thinks is best for his son whilst also trying to follow his dream of being a comedian. It's perfect. Andy's Komeiji is so good. You get a lot of time to explore his character. You're on the Ferris wheel with him, you get to talk with him, and in Shoma's route, you even get to see a happy ending for him, and it's very sweet and heartwarming, and you get more with Shoma as well, and their relationship, and it's fantastic. I love everything about this character, which is weird, because you'd think a guy who looks like Minecraft Steve would be one of the worst characters in the game, but it's the exact opposite. He's just a character that I think really elevates the game, and when he dies it's super tragic and really raises the stakes of the story as well. So just a great character, and he's used well in the story as well. You also just get a lot about this character because you go back to him so many times, like, oh, his boy got him this tie that he wears all the time, and oh, my son made this little charm for me after performing on television, and it's just like, dang, like this character feels like a real character. And I think that could be said about a lot of the characters in this game, which is really quite surprising since I don't think a lot of games manage to really hit that hard with characters, and I think that's something really special about this AI series in general, and honestly the Zero Shape series as a whole. They managed to successfully create characters, and they give you enough time to interact with them. Like, even stuff that's not technically plot relevant tells you a lot about each character, and honestly, it's great. It's easily the best part about the game, and why I'd recommend anyone to play it, just because of how well they write these characters. Even if there's some plot stuff that doesn't quite work, I think the characters are enough to easily get you through the story, even if it doesn't make sense at times. My second and third favorite characters in this game were Leon and Kizuna, surprisingly, because at first it's like, oh, it's gonna be like a cheesy romance kind of thing, but they hit it out of the park. Everything about Leon, he's he's initially like a loser and kind of pathetic. He's lost his job, and he then falls in love with this girl who only just sang and danced, and so you're like, this guy's kind of a weirdo creep. But the more you get to know about him, and as time goes on, you really get to see who Leon is as a character and like as a person. And he's really nice. He's stupid, but in a way that's charming. And he really cares about other people, and he doesn't like the fact that he previously did a lot of crimes in order to make do. So he's very likable. He's a very likable himbo character, and he's great. And then his relationship with Kizuna as well is really quite likable. Like the whole glass shoe thing and Prince Charming, and how I think the point that really hit me and was like, wow, this is some fun writing is, I mean, although it's a little cheesy, but I liked it anyway, was I think in one of the later routes, I think the line specifically is, I'll be your legs, and then he memorized the whole dance that she does multiple times throughout the game, and he does all the dance moves for her, and it's like, oh, that's really sweet. Even though it's a little corny, I'll admit. I mean, it's very like poppy and silly, but it solidifies who he is as a person. He really wants to help people out, and it's just so charming that you can't help but like him. Which leads into Kizuna, who's a character I also really enjoyed in this story. She's initially very stereotypical, like pop idol, where she likes to dance, she likes to sing, and she's happy-go-lucky and is a rich girl because her father is the head of the Chieda family, who is very rich and owns a lot of businesses and things like that. But her story takes a dark turn where she is then essentially crippled by a building collapse that affects a lot of people in the story as well, and she then spirals and thinks that her friends are only her friends because they feel guilty, and there's a sort of like survival guilt, as well as her relationship with Leon is then also affected because as they spend more time together, she realizes that he's being very genuine and he really cares about her, but this idea is sort of tainted because she thinks that he's only doing this because she's crippled rather than actually just being a nice person. I mean, because she knows that he's a nice person, but she thinks there's this added burden onto him by the fact that she's in a wheelchair, and it kind of damages their relationship that otherwise would have probably just blossomed normally into a nice little romance. And so there's this tragic part of her, and she's also plot relevant because she has certain information later on, so she's just great because she is vital to the plot as well as being a really charming and nice person, and her romance with Leon ends up for the best, and it just adds that little sweet to the otherwise bitter situation that they're in. As far as dubs go, I don't mind either cast, really. You can go either English or Japanese, and either works very well, with the exception of ProZD, at least in my opinion, just because it's just his voice. He's an okay voice actor, it's just like, his voice is so clearly his voice, and you see so many of his videos like on Twitter and YouTube and stuff, that it completely took me out of the game, which is unfortunate, but I think that would happen with any YouTuber that I'm familiar with. And fortunately for Amelie, I'm not super familiar with her content, so that saved me from not connecting with the character because I was distracted by the voice. But for everyone else, they're all very good, and all their lines are written really well and are delivered very well, so no problems with me, really. I think the only characters that suffer a bit are usually the gangster ones, because there's a very particular accent that Yakuza have that you can't really replicate in English. I mean, the best you could do is just imitate a Italian mobster accent, but even that doesn't quite grasp how a Yakuza talks in Kansai Ban. There's none of those like rolling R's or like that very particular sound and accent that a Yakuza would have, and it's just unfortunate that the English cast can't perform that way.
Plus all that sketchy research he was doing. Maybe he was using the kids as part of his research or something. Maybe combining bodies.
Combining bodies?
2人の人間の体を左右に切り裂いて、一方の右半身ともう一方の左半身をくっつけちまうって実験のことだ。
なんなのそれ。なんでそんなことを。
さあな、イカれたやつの思惑なんて想像すらできねえよ。とにかくホラドリはその実験をしようと企んでたみてえで。
Whereas in the Japanese dub, it's very clear, and Momo in particular is done super well. So, but as far as choosing either or, you're fine with either. I think I only went with the Japanese dub just because the game takes place in Japan, Tokyo in particular, so that's what I went with. Although I've seen the whole game with English as well. So if it were me, I'd pick the Japanese, but you're more than fine with the English dub. And now we get on to the bad side of the characters. I think Date is super poorly handled. Now, I understand why they did this to Date, and spoilers from here on out, so I'll just say that I like the game and you should go play it, but from here on out there'll be spoilers, so heads up. But I really don't like how they handled Date. It feels like the first game didn't happen at all because of how they handled it. So to explain myself, Date is a character who went through like this gigantic arc in the first game where he found out that his body wasn't his real body and that he had to have suppressants to stave off the need to kill people. And so it was this whole thing where the killer was going back and forth between bodies, and it was really interesting and cool. And by the end of the game, Date gets back into his original body, and this game completely throws that into the garbage. It's really annoying. Now I get it in a sense because they wanted to make the game stand alone, but I found that completely dumb and pointless. I mean, I can understand the need to make it so that someone could play a game and not have to worry about the previous entry, but it's a sequel to the last game. I mean, there's characters in this game that are from the last game and are more likable because of the fact that they make reference to the last game. So this whole thing is stupid. This whole idea that, oh, this game should be a standalone game is dumb because it's a sequel. I'm sorry, but to do that and then to throw out Date's new body because they explain it with he's wearing a silicone mask that disguises his face, but also his body type is wrong because Date in his original body is a much larger person, and his face is completely different, and his neck size is probably quite different. And So it's just completely baffling as to why they made this choice, because it feels like they just throw out Date's character entirely just to make it look, oh look, it's Date from the first game. They did it entirely because he looks like that through most of the first game, and to then throw that out because it's like, I just don't understand. It's so poorly done. Every time Dante's on the screen is just super frustrating, because it's like, oh, the character that they butchered is still here. Great. I kind of wish you killed him instead of making me watch this corpse walk around and make jokes about porn mags or whatever. So, I don't know. I think they did Date dirty in this game is all I'm gonna say. My problems with Date are even further exacerbated due to the plot as well, but I'll get into that later on. So why don't I just get into the plot now? Okay, so the plot of AI, the Somnium Files Nirvana Initiative, is basically a murder mystery. The mystery begins with Ryuki and his boss and several of the people that you've seen from the previous games are on a game show that is being live streamed. And so this live stream is taking place. They're answering trivia questions, and from this you realize that there's something wrong with Ryuki. But that is put aside for a power outage to happen and then a body to appear on stage with the sign "Free to Free" stabbed into it. And that is how the mystery begins. Now, how the game unfolds is through a series of routes, is what they're called. So you pick certain decisions within these somniums, and from those decisions you get different routes. There's the Shoma route, there's the Gen route. There are several different ones that aren't canon. I mean, there's a true ending and stuff like that, and there's some special endings that you can get as well, but throughout the game you have to do these routes in order to get information that you'll need to solve this case. Now, as far as story structure goes, I don't quite understand why this series has the branching timeline structure to it. And the reason why I say this is because in Zero Time Escape, there's a very specific mechanic in universe which allows people from different multiverses to communicate with each other briefly or in spurts. And in particular, the main character of each game always has a particularly strong connection to this said power. Whereas in AI, the Somnium Files, and in AI, the Somnium Files Nirvana Initiative, there isn't a very good explanation. The only thing I can imagine is that syncing allows people to, both syncing the widget system and the technology around it allows people to gather information in a different way that allows them to see certain potential scenarios. But it's not explicitly explained in either the first game or this one. So I would imagine that in the probable third game that they would explain why this happens. And it's just unfortunate that they didn't do it in this game, because I still don't quite understand why this game is structured the way that it is, because it doesn't make much sense to me as to why Ryuki would know certain things about things that didn't actually take place, and the same thing happens with Date as well, and Mizuki. So I'm fine with, it's not that great, but if they explain it in the third game, then I'd be very happy. But for now, you just have to put that in the back of your mind as you're playing this game, which is unfortunate, and I wish they would explain it, but that's just how it is. Let's go over some of the more minor details in the game, but I might as well bring up, like the music. The music in this game is awesome. A lot of really good tracks, a lot of super catchy or poppy or very serious mood setting music in the game, and it's all great. I'll give you a couple examples here. as you can tell, they're quite nice. The options menu in this game, pretty good. Not the best I've seen. And also when you start up the game, there's like a really weird like start menu / launcher thing that not the most modern thing I've ever seen, but this happens to be a thing that I've seen in many Japanese games, is like a slightly archaic launcher menu, but it's not bad. It's just a little simple, but not a deal breaker. And honestly, the options menu in-game is quite extensive. I mean, not super extensive. There's no like colorblind options or stuff like that, but it'll be enough to get you where you need to go in most cases. I'd also like to talk about the UI in-game, and it's fantastic. It's all based on the fact that each of the main characters have the widget system, which is an in-game thing where the left or right eye, depending on which one was taken out and replaced with a AI driven eye, is basically feeding you information that you need to know, and it's really good. I like the in-game storytelling reason as to why you have a menu system, and it's intuitive and really well done, and it's also like not overly obtrusive. It's good. Also, I'd just like to add that the fight scenes in the first game and then in this game are kind of bad. Like, there's a lot of enemies standing around and jobbing to the protagonists in ways that don't really make sense. Like, they'll just be standing there, not shooting, and letting any of the characters just come up and punch them or hit them with a pipe or shoot them or whatever, and it really takes me out of the universe. At least they're choreographed in fun ways, like there's a lot of goofy stuff that happens, or in ways that aren't, like clearly aren't meant to be taken too seriously, but it kind of takes the tension out entirely when you just have guys standing around waiting for either their turn or for people to just attack them. It's not great, but also not a deal breaker, but it's just something I'd like to bring up since it was just really obvious to me and something I haven't seen people bring up. So now I'm not going to go much into the plot of AI, the Somnium Files Nirvana Initiative, because for the most part it's fine. There's a couple things that are a bit off, but don't bother me that much, and the parts that do bother me I've already gone over, but there's another really annoying plot point that I'd just like to go over quickly just to get it out of the way. So we'll fast forward to the plot. And so basically after a collapse in an underground cathedral, Date somehow survived that, got hit in the head, forgot who he was, broke out of a prison because a white snake fell into prison that's somewhere, and then he escaped and lived in another prefecture for 6 years. It's really stupid. Like, that has to be the worst written thing I've ever seen in this series, and there was some kind of annoying stuff in the previous games as well, but that's just so poorly thought out, so stupid. Like, it took me out of the story. Like, why would you write it's, yeah, like you could probably hear in my voice, it's so frustrating. The amount of convenience and garbage that you have to write in order to keep Date alive, it's so dumb. Just kill the character off. He's already bad in this game. Just get rid of him permanently. Like, I actually wouldn't have minded. God, I hate Date in this game. It's unfortunate because I like the character in the first game. He's great. Now I'm going to talk about the gameplay. The gameplay is good. I mean, it's a puzzle game, and honestly, I'm not very good at puzzle games because my brain doesn't work like that, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. Now, the only thing that will take some getting used to is the fact that you should be writing down some hints and clues about ideas or revelations that you found, like, oh, I should write this character's name down, or oh, I should probably write that number down because I'll probably forget it, and you will. Although, to be fair, the game does allow you to use your audio log, and you can go back and see that number that you probably forgot to write down, like I did a couple times. So it's good on that, but I would still recommend writing a note or typing out a note on Notepad or something, because the game won't just put in the code after you learned it automatically. You'll have to put it in yourself, so keep that in mind. But otherwise, the puzzles are not that bad. As a matter of fact, they're much easier than the ones in Zero Escape. So they're pretty easy, and it's usually just like, oh, figure out which thing does what, and then it's very simple. It's not like you're doing the cube puzzle and time dilemma, or some of the harder ones in 999, like the ones where you have to memorize numbers and stuff like that are always pretty difficult, whereas in this game it's fairly easy. You won't have any problems. In conclusion, it's a game I really like, and I would recommend to most people who enjoy story focused and more specifically character focused games. They are all great except for Date, like I stated, and yeah, I can't recommend it enough. Yeah, even the puzzles aren't too bad, so just get used to doing QTEs and writing down a couple notes about ideas and numbers in particular, and you'll be just dandy. And you'll have a really good time, because everything else about this game is fantastic. The music's good, the writing's good, at least for the characters. You'll really love Komeiji, you'll like Lian. Momo's fun, although I think I prefer his Japanese voice actor just because he does a really good Yakuza, like Kansai-ban accent, and it's perfect. Whereas I think Moma in the English dub is fine, but just doesn't quite hit that Yakuza spot, or I think the Japanese voice actor does. But anyway, side tangent. Yeah, highly recommend it. Go play it. It's available, like you can see, on Steam, Xbox One, PS4, Switch, and the Microsoft Store. So yeah, go buy it. It's available now, and I'd really recommend it for some excellent character work. This is Timoteo Belfry, signing off.